It's not over here.
Yeah.
I'm with Mandy.
I think it just kind of ends there.
I don't know if they can turn it down. You want me to go?
If you wouldn't mind, just go and check. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the House Juvenile Justice Committee meeting to order. Today, we are going to be hearing from impacted agencies and partners on the on House Bill 440. First, we're going to be hearing from the Department of Juvenile Justice. Then we're going to be hearing from our juvenile court judges, public defenders, prosecutors, and then our sheriffs. So that's kind of the run. We're going to hear testimony from the impacted agencies. Then committee members, you will have an opportunity to ask any questions, and then we'll move on to the next agency. So is Commissioner Oliver here? Ah, okay. Sorry, I didn't see you back there. And I've got my glasses on, so. So, Commissioner, please join us. Appreciate your being here today. And we will turn the mic over to you.
All right. Good morning or good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm just going to just speak briefly as it relates to this bill as juvenile justice. As you all know, we house juveniles from the age of 13 to 21 as it stands. So as it relates to this bill, we're a neutral party in it. It doesn't, we can handle whichever way it goes. We're fine. We're just completely neutral in it. It's as long as it's, we have the resources. If it passes, we have the resources to be able to handle the capacity. So I just want to open up for any questions. We're here to be a resource to you all, to answer any questions, to provide any information that you all may need as it relates to this topic. So I'm just opening up for any questions that you all may have as it relates to us.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Members of the committee, do you have any questions of Commissioner Oliver? Vice Chair Dubnik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you mentioned the capacity. Talk a little bit about what that capacity looks like now. With historical data in mind, is there any way to forecast, if this change takes place, what that looks like? I just would like to hear a little bit about that.
Yes. So looking at the document that I received as it relates to that, and looking at the numbers of kids at our current capacity right now in our RYDCs, we're running over a little we're at 70% at capacity. In our YDCs, we're just running about 50%. But then taking a look at the numbers of potential impacts, we're looking at potentially, and that's on a conservative end, is constructing 4 new facilities as it relates to this bill, and 2 RYDCs and 2 YDCs, based off of the numbers that I see in the Gwinnett area and Cobb County area. Currently, DJJ, as it stands right now, in our RYDCs and YDCs, with those numbers, looking at these charts, our current facilities would be over capacity if, based on these numbers, if this bill passes, that we would have to build some more facilities in those areas.
Thank you. 16. Representative Hutchinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard you say that you're not taking a position one way or the other on raise the age.
That's correct.
Can you explain to us why?
Because currently, right now, we house kids up to 21. But the only thing that I would take a stance on if the raise the age bill passes, that is we have the resources to be able to handle the additional 17-year-olds that are coming in. So it's not a matter of the age, because we're already housing 17-year-olds as it stands right now.
But do you have a position about what it means for a 17-year-old to get arrested and put in an adult jail versus a juvenile jail?
Again, I stay completely neutral.
I mean, like emotionally, not financially.
Emotionally, no. I know the science behind it, and I know that certain crimes we can save some of those 17-year-olds. I do understand that. And I think, currently right now we're doing a good job of that. If the 17-year-olds come to us, if this bill passes, we'll continue to do that. So I understand the reasoning and the science behind it, and I get it. But as a stance, taking a firm stance of saying, yes, the state of Georgia needs to raise the age, I don't have a stance on that one way or the other.
Okay.
Number 26. Representative Oliver.
Thank you, Commissioner, for visiting with me before and looking at these numbers. When you said the chart told you what the expectation, which chart are you talking about?
It was the raise the age. I'm not sure who sent it, but I got it from the Juvenile Justice Committee. Sentencing project, and it was on the page. It doesn't have page numbers, but it's a chart that says arrest 17-year-olds by county 2018. And when I looked at the numbers for Gwinnett County, it's very small to read here, but it looks like it's roughly about 550 17-year-olds that were arrested in Gwinnett County, during that time frame. And then Cobb was right behind it, and then Fulton, which was pushing the 400 to 450 mark. And so those are the numbers that I was looking at.
Do you know how many of those 500 arrested in Gwinnett County were kept in jail, and for how long?
I don't. I haven't looked into that study, but we do know, looking at the numbers, and I think it was about around 6,500. Some of those will have to be processed in and out, and typically that's what happens in our RYDCs now, is that a 16-year-old, for instance, will come in, they will be assessed and see what needs need to be met, and then typically sometimes it most likely be placed back into the community.
And what you would probably, I'm asking if you would agree with me, that 2/3 of the 500 arrests in Cobb County, and they're both around 500, are misdemeanors. You agree with me on that number?
Yes.
And you agree with me that of misdemeanors taken into custody, most of those are not kept in jail. Am I right or wrong about that?
Most of them.
So really, the 500 figure for somebody taking up X number of days can't be an accurate number, because we don't know who's kept and how long. And isn't that the heart of our problem?
We don't know that number, and that's what's kind of hard to actually come up with a definite answer. But what I can say is that looking at the court systems around currently, especially in Gwinnett County, that right now Gwinnett County, last time I looked at, I think was somewhere around 350 to 400 juveniles as it stands right now that we take in from Gwinnett. And so you add the 17-year-olds in there, they're going to have a way to process in and process back out into the community. So I think the ultimate goal, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is this bill is to try to service these 17-year-olds in the community. But sometimes they may have to come in to our facilities to see what that needs are, see what services they need, and then transfer back out in the community.
May I have one final question, Madam Chair?
Sure.
And our discussions have gone around, and we've shared these with you, that the other states that have made this transition all have realized less costs than were expected. Do you agree with me on that?
I know our conversations we had, and I hear you. And to be honest, I hadn't taken a look to see what those cost analysis would be, how it would impact the state of Georgia.
That's our task.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just for clarification, Commissioner, your contemplation of constructing the new facilities was predicated upon incarcerating every child, every 17-year-old that was
Not
arrested.
every child. They're 50-bed facilities based on best practices, national standards. That's the facility size. So we're not building like these large facilities. So you're talking to 200 additional beds. So out of that 6,500, that number, we're anticipating at least 200 of those coming through DJJ.
Okay. Representative Cantrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You asked my first question just then. So do you have a ballpark figure if you're accurate about those facilities? And by the way, thanks for what you do.
Thank you.
Do you have an idea what kind of cost we're looking at to construct those facilities?
Roughly about $200 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Collins.
How long has it been since the facility has been constructed in our state for YDC? Do you know?
I don't know a brand new facility. I do. I know that we've redid a couple of facilities in the area. I think it was 4, but I'm not sure about brand new construction. I have some of the staff here that may be able to answer that, but I'm not sure what year that. 3. And within the last 10 years, we built 3, but I'm not sure the exact date.
3 in the last 10 years. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Representative Hutchinson.
And how many have we closed in the last 5 years? I think just one, Just Gwinnett?
Gwinnett. Was there another one?
We closed to Sandersville.
I believe it's more than Gwinnett.
Yeah,
Sandersville.
yeah.
I can get that number, and I apologize. I'm 6 months in, so I don't know,
Okay,
have all those numbers with me, but
Yeah, because we closed Sandersville and opened up, I think, Wilkes, and then closed one to open up Capital.
so how many? 2?
Yeah, and then I'm trying to remember when we closed Paulding.
So at least 3.
Like RYDCs and YDCs, because I can think of 2 at least.
You can call somebody and get that phone for you?
Can if you got it. Do anybody y'all have that? Okay, they're getting it.
Okay, we'll circle back. Committee members, any more questions for Commissioner Oliver? Okay,
And I
thank
can
you.
email that information to you, but off the top of my head, is based on what we were talking about. It was 3, and I think they were all RY.
Okay, all right, so 3 are YDCs, but
But
you'll
let me
circle
confirm
back.
that, correct.
Okay, all right. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Commissioner Oliver. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from the Council of Juvenile Court Judges. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm glad everybody was able to make it safely here through all this rain. I do appreciate everyone's coming out on such a bad weather day. Committee members, we'll just let the judge and Director John introduce themselves.
Okay, good afternoon. I think I know most of you. I'm Lisa Jones. I'm the juvenile court judge for the Southwestern Circuit down in Americus. It covers 6 counties: Lee, Macon, Sly, Stewart, Sumter, and Webster. And I'm the president-elect for the Council of Juvenile Court Judges. I'm happy to make it up here through the weather because this is important. It's important to all of us. And thank you for listening to us. My family down in South Georgia, my great-grandfather was on the legislature, and my cousin ran a few years ago and lost by 7 votes, so I've been hearing about this process all my life. And I appreciate you allowing us to have input. Down where we are, in the Southwestern Circuit, all our counties are different, which some people may find hard to believe, but it's a large geographic area. It's from Fort Valley, if you know where that is, down to Albany, over to Columbus. So I live in Americus, which is the hub of the circuit, and my furthest county that I go to is Stewart County, which is 60 miles away. So we travel the circuit down there. I have court in Americus on Mondays and Wednesdays and go to the other counties on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we have to stay on a strict schedule. Sometimes it feels like Lucy on the I Love Lucy show with the donut shop. But anyways, we have to keep moving, so I'm glad that I was able to be here today. Our circuit down there is a DJJ dependent court. And I know we've talked about this before. Some of the circuits are independent and some are DJJ dependent. Judge Burton thought she was going to be able to make it today, and I know she talked to you, Mr. Dubnik, earlier, but she had court in Dawson County. But that's an independent court, and she did an analysis on what the impact would be, there in that circuit, and found just for the additional court employees she would need, it would be over $300,000 a year for those 6 necessary employees. Ours, is different because, like I said, we are DJJ dependent. But in looking at our numbers, if the 17-year-olds were included, if traffic was included as well as the delinquency cases, we would be looking at about a 1/3% increase if we had 17-year-olds. And if we did not include traffic, we would be looking at about 22%. But I think the important thing to recognize here is how hard it is to determine these numbers. And in looking at my circuit, and I have some handouts going around, spells out the 6 counties, and the highlighted counties and courts are the ones that we were able to get this data from. And that was from our district attorney's office, and those were the courts that they're serving. The other courts, we would still be receiving 17-year-olds from, but we don't have data on. But you can see how complicated this is from those different classes of courts and how many we have. Not every county has a superior court, a state court, and a juvenile court. You know, where we are, only one of our counties has a state court. So, you know, we could go on and on forever about how hard it is to determine these numbers. And I've been, you know, in this job, I'm about to start my 20th year, and I've seen a lot of changes throughout the years. I prosecuted before that at the DA's office. I remember 20 years ago when we were under the MOU, DJJ was, and it was very costly to the state and a very stressful time. You know, we don't ever want to go back to that. And our issue as juvenile court judges, you know, we want to do the right thing. We're happy to do the right thing. This isn't a job that you take for the money. You know, I think pretty much every one of us that's doing it has, you know, we do this for our own set of reasons. And, you know, I've always felt very fortunate to do it, but we need the tools to be able to handle it, you know. And as I've told you all before, you know, where I am, I'm already strapped thin. You know, I have 2 employees that I can hardly ever keep because we're so overworked and they're so underpaid, but we still keep trudging along. But, you know, we have people that come into court every day and look at us like we should have a crystal ball and all the answers to make their lives better. But we need the resources to be able to do that. You know, for example, I had a case not long ago in Lee County, and if you all know where that is, that's just north of Albany. And I had a kid that was involved in a gang called the Rolling 40 Crips. And they were running firearms from Warner Robins down to Albany. And I committed him to the Department of Juvenile Justice. He and his gang members were actually trying to intimidate witnesses during the hearing. And I committed him, and which was the most restrictive thing I could do at the time, and recommended that he be detained in a YDC on a long-term basis due to his gang involvement and attempts to intimidate witnesses during the hearing. Well, as you know, they have to be screened within 10 days of the disposition hearing. And what happens but he gets let out? I don't understand that, and I don't have any control over that. But it's very frustrating. And since that time, he's been charged with child molestation and intimidation of witnesses. And he's right back out there. So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but how would that change with House Bill 440? How would that change?
if we had, well, for one thing, he turned 17.
Mm-hmm.
If he were 18,
Mm-hmm.
instead of going straight to Superior Court and bonding out, he would probably still be in the juvenile court system, and I would have more control over what was going on.
Okay.
So that would be a help, but it would be a help if the Department of Juvenile Justice had the resources to keep him where he needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of hand-in-hand process.
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of link together some of the incongruencies, and that's why I wanted a lot of people, to come in and tell us, because, we're told, Commissioner Oliver just testified that the RYDCs are about 70% capacity and the YDCs are at 50% capacity.
And I don't understand that, and I have said that many times, because this kid should have been kept.
So that's why I'm trying to kind of link all those chains together, because
Mhm.
we're seeing so many different facets.
He should have been kept, and I don't understand that either. How could those YDCs not be any more full than that, and yet I have kids being let out that have no business on the street?
Okay, all right.
So, but
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please do. But, my point of all of this is if our system is strained, then that's when bad things happen. And it's not just DJJ, it's the courts, it's law enforcement, it's transportation for hearings, it's, space for staff, it's, operating cost, all kinds of things that have to be considered. And, I know from having a strained system down where I am, the last thing we want is for a child to fall through the cracks. When I came in office, almost 20 years ago, we had children in foster care that the department didn't even have custody of. They just had people's children. We've had horrible things happen over the years. I've had a foster care child murdered, in the last couple of years. Just give us the tools that we need. Just the court ourselves. I could really use a secretary. I know I've told you all this over and over again. We're here, we want to do the right thing. And we're open to any questions. And I know they're hard questions.
Okay, thank you. Representative Collins.
You think our committee might be able to get her the information she wants to know about why that young man was let out?
Sure. If you'll give me the details, then I can liaise with Juvenile Justice and we'll find out.
Be
If
happy
you'd like.
to. And it's not
Okay.
the first time something
Okay.
like that's happened.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
You're doing some good work.
Thank you.
All our juvenile court judges throughout the state are, and they're overburdened and overworked. And I think it's the desire of this committee to make this situation better for everyone, especially our youth.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Hutchinson.
I had a question about this whole situation of why he was released. I thought they were either released or retained based on a point system. So if that particular child didn't have the points, wouldn't they have been released not because of bed space, but because they didn't have the points?
Okay. There are two different mechanisms. The first thing is when they actually come into custody, if they're detained, when they're actually arrested. And that's an assessment instrument that the department uses, and that's a point system. But when I actually commit a child to the Department of Juvenile Justice, they can keep that child for up to 2 years. And they assess that through the screening process, which is 10 days after my hearing. But in the commitment order, it asks for the judge's recommendations. So I put all these detailed recommendations in there based on what I'm seeing in the courtroom and the evidence that I'm presented with. And I don't take it lightly. And then the next thing I know, they're back out. And why are they back out if we're only at 50% capacity? Okay. So why are we closing these YDCs? So if we, are we creating a problem if we raise the age to 18 and we don't have those beds available when we have more kids that are going to go into restrictive custody because they're going to have committed more felonies the older that they get? We have people all the time, the lawyers say, well, thank God this kid's 17, now he can go to Superior Court. That's not the right way to look at it, because we all know about brain development in kids and how their minds work. I have a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old, and I promise you the 17-year-old is no more mature after their 17th birthday than they are when they're 16 and a half. So, we know what the right thing to do is.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Representative Oliver.
I asked one of your colleagues, and I'll ask you, and y'all can think about this. It seems that what many other states have done is just separate out the traffic offenses, and that's complicating an already complicated issue. I'd like your opinion either today or later about how we would do that to relieve you of that burden.
I think there are a couple of different things that have been brought up in prior meetings. How does that really pass constitutional muster? And I know the person that was here from before said that in the other states they'd never had that really become an issue. But I think that philosophically, if you're going to do it for misdemeanors and felonies, you ought to do it for, if we're going to do the right thing, let's do it for everyone.
I'm just interested in the money, which is the most important thing that you're bringing to our attention. And so I'd like to know what's the way to separate out that for the purpose of revenue to your governments and purpose of serving them in a way to make this issue maybe a little simpler. I'd just like you don't have to tell me now, but how do you do that?
I think that as far as, we don't really accept fines or anything like that.
But the traffic court does.
Right. They might be the
They're
people to
pretty
talk
interested
to
in that usually.
about that.
So
We're more interested in the manpower just to be able to process those cases, not the fines.
So separating them out is what I'd like your opinion in. Maybe not today.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Gullett.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
For what you do. I'm gonna go down the rabbit hole for just one quick second. So on the young man that was released, the gangbanger that was released, And then Madam Chair Lady asks, how would this bill really affect that? And you said, well, I'd still have jurisdiction over him. Is that really a positive if the resources downstream aren't there to hold him? So if he had been 17 now and he gets locked up in Superior Court or convicted in Superior Court now, do you see him being released like he was in the YD, in the Youth Detention Center? And so wouldn't that really be a negative for him to still be under you in the juvenile court system versus?
I think it depends on a couple different ways to look at it.
Okay.
During the pendency of all this, he turned 17.
Right.
So then he had the child molestation charge and the intimidating a witness charge.
Right.
And before before he turned 17, he was also charged with 2 counts of affray and 2 counts of violation of street gang terrorism and Prevention Act. But when they turn 17 and they go to Superior Court, most often they're going to take first offender and they're going to be given a bond. If I had been able to hold him throughout all these cases, then he could have maybe been given restrictive custody, been in a YDC, gotten some services, maybe had a chance to turn around. I don't know.
Okay.
But it made my whole court look like a farce because, there I am telling these victims I'm doing the hardest thing I can for him, which is this 2-year commitment with the Department of Juvenile Justice, and he's let out 10 days later.
Okay.
With this recommendation that I have on this order.
Right. And I do see positives with us going down this route. I'm just
depends.
trying to understand certain situations. That argument actually seemed, in my mind, go the opposite direction.
Right.
But
There are a couple different ways to look at it.
okay. Thank you so much.
Representative Cantrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you.
You're clearly in favor of this legislation, correct?
I think it's a lot of work for all of us, but I think
You think it's the right thing to do,
in the
though?
long run, it's probably the right thing to do. And I think if you're going to do it for one type of offense, you should do it for all. And, that's why I'm saying, the more time that we have to phase all this in, the better.
Okay. I've yet to speak to anyone who doesn't feel like this is the right thing to do. But you're also aware of the budget constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a member of this committee, what would you do?
If I, that's a really good question. If I were to put this bill forward and push it forward, I would put the implementation, I don't know what happened to the mic, but I would have the implementation a couple of years off.
Delayed, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And give people time to kind of get their
Right,
ducks in a row?
to assimilate. Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Representative Sharper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here also. I don't know exactly who could get this information and maybe something for the commissioner to answer, but I would like to know the average length of stay for the ones that are committed. That's one thing that'll kind of help us out in the facilities department. And then I'm wondering, they have a 10-day screen. They have 10 days to be screened, right? But is there a backlog right now in the juvenile system of, even though they hold them have within 10 days or so to have a screening, but are we backlogged throughout the entire state of kids having to stay somewhere temporary too long? And then can you give me a little insight on that?
I agree with you on this. I would like to know the average length of stay after a commitment, because I see a lot of kids back in the community immediately, released to the community with services. By the time I commit a child, I've already ordered every service in the community we have available, and it's not working, and that's why I'm committing them. And my other issue is lots of times when they're committed, the department will release them pending them finding them a placement. So they'll get arrested again, and then I say, what are they doing back here? I just committed them. Well, we sent them home while we're waiting on finding a place for them. And I don't understand how that happens.
Right.
How can you be responsible for those kids who are committed to your custody and you're doing that?
Right, so I'm thinking that there's probably a disconnect somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
because if you have this room available and you guys are sending them back out,
Mm-hmm.
there's a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to know, more about that, those numbers.
Mhm.
Someone should have
And,
those
you know,
numbers.
and I've had probation officers say to me, I say, why are they out? Well, Judge, it seems to me the only ones that they're keeping are the sex offenders. That's not right.
Right,
It shouldn't be that way.
okay.
I'm just saying, if we do this, please don't set us up for failure, because we've got it hard enough as it is right now.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Thank you, Judge. We appreciate you being here. Certainly, we can serve as a resource. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Okay, thank you.
And now we will hear from the public defenders. Dominique. She has power. Is it working? Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. We can just wait till the end. All right. Looks like you're ready to go. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to the committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jiminique Rogers. I'm the Interim Executive Director for the Georgia Public Defender Council, and today with me I have Amanda Graham, excuse me, who's our Chief Legal Officer, and I also have Cheryl Coronas, who's our External Affairs Director.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind, just as a point, we have a lot of people watching.
Yes.
So before they start texting me, could you just make an effort to kind of speak into the microphone so the people watching can hear?
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So we're excited to come and talk about the Raise the Age. You heard earlier that we don't have a position on it, but we want to talk about what we do as an agency and how Raise the Age would impact us and how we would impact the clients who would be covered under that 17 below 18 block. As you know, Georgia Public Defender Council, we represent individuals who are indigent from across the state. If they are eligible for our services, we provide representation in Superior Court as well as Juvenile Court. Now, the national discussion over Raise the Age has looked at three different aspects. One, that juvenile courts have lower repeat offending rates than adult criminal prosecutions. Brain research indicates that 17-year-olds are developmentally along the same line and similar to other adolescents, and you heard the reference by Judge Jones that a 17-year-old is essentially the same, she can attest, as a 16-and-a-half-year-old. And, of course, the other states, and you asked about that earlier, the other states who've implemented Raise the Age legislation have found that kind of across the board, the state has not encountered a significant cost. And when we look at it, it appears that the costs are just shifting. I sit on the Southern Juvenile Defender Advisory Board. That's a component of the National Juvenile Defender Center. And so we have been talking to folks, especially in the southern states, part of this advisory group, about the impact of that. That would include Louisiana, who has Raised the Age, North Carolina, and South Carolina as well. So when we look at the historical arrest rates in Georgia for 17-year-olds, I took the data that you heard from Josh from the Sentencing Project, his analysis of the GBI statistics for the arrest of 17-year-old. And as we lay it out, we see that it has gone from 2016, it's been reduced up through 2018. And what you're looking at is in the orange, those are the property crimes. So the FBI quantifies crimes in terms of the Violent Crime Index, which are VCI. And there's a note at the bottom that talks about what those are: murder, non-negligent manslaughter, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, and gang violence. And then you have the remainder that are considered property crimes. So what you have is showing kind of the breakdown of that. So when we looked at what the impact would be, we worked from that data to estimate what it would look like in shifting our caseload. Because if they're indigent, then we would represent them one way or the other. So what does that mean in shifting to our juvenile-focused defenders as opposed to dealing with them in Superior Court? So we deliver our juvenile defense in two ways. One, through the circuit offices, of course, those are staffed, and we have our assistant public defenders. And we also provide representation through appointed counsel, and we have those all across the state. Now, kind of as a context and some numbers I'm going to show you in a minute, the Georgia Public Defender Council has circuit offices in 43 of the 49 judicial circuits, essentially 153 of the 159 counties in Georgia. So in the 43 circuits that we provide representation, the statute has under OCGA 1712-23C a provision that we should have someone who specializes in juvenile defense. Across the board, we are tasked to provide counsel when there's a conflict in a case. And I make that distinction because we know, as we talked about with gangs, let me just start with juveniles across the board. When youth are involved, they tend to do things in groups. There's almost always going to be at least two, and generally there'll be five. And then when you get into enhanced cases where you have gangs, you're talking about a number of them. And the way that this may operate is you may have 6 individuals that are involved in a case. And we see this, of course, in Superior Court, we see it in juvenile court, and we already have cases where you have younger individuals below 17 that are going to be handled in juvenile court, and then you have individuals in Superior Court who are 18 in their mid-20s. So we're already kind of dealing with those cases, and the way that we deal with them is we'll handle one in the circuit office, and then the remainder go to appointed private attorneys in that area. So we actually are operating in two different kind of simultaneous systems, juvenile and superior, at the same time. Now, the historical trends in how we handle cases, we have two lines here. The first one, the blue line on the bottom, are the trend in us handling juvenile cases actually in the circuit offices. So you see that's gone up. We know we have a juvenile rewrite that has reduced the way and the manner that offenses are handled. But our trigger starts when a youth is going to be, and I'm going to use the term charged, even though that's not what it's called in juvenile court, but so everyone will understand when they're charged and notified that they are believed to have committed a delinquent act. So our representation would start there anyway, regardless of what would happen. So you see that blue line, that's the number of our juvenile cases that our circuit assistant public defenders handle. The number up top is what you see for all cases, including those 6 opt-out circuits. Now those circuits, they're not going to be in the numbers I provide you, but I wanted to give you an overall view of what the juvenile landscape looks like for representation in Georgia when you're talking about indigent representation. So what we would need to do is we just need to make the shift, as I said. We need to consider that we're not going to be representing the 17-and-a-half-year-old or the 17 and a day in Superior Court. We would be representing them in juvenile court. So what would that take? So we look first at our circuit offices. And on the left, you'll see a column. Those are our public defender circuits with the highest number of juvenile cases. We expect to see those that are in metropolitan areas because there's more people there. But if you look down the list, you see that we have Chattahoochee, Conasauga, Alcovy, and Coweta as well. So we do have some of the circuits that are considered rural, and within those circuits, there are truly rural counties. On the right, you'll see our PD circuits where we still do not yet have a state-appropriated juvenile public defender. And just kind of as background context there, we have a mandate, as I said, to have a division in our circuits that specializes in juvenile defense. Starting in FY17, we began to be appropriated funds for up to what to that point had been an unfunded mandate. So we began to, I think we received 15, and then 10, and then 9 funding for juvenile public defenders. We have 9 remaining juvenile public defender slots that require funding. So what you see on the right are the 9 circuits that have yet to have a state-funded juvenile public defender. I put this information up because when we talk about our capacity to handle, we kind of hone in on one of the issues that the Raise the Age doesn't create it, but it's a gap that is pre-existing that we would need to fill to make sure we can shore up our capacity. And when you look at the circuits on the right, which are those PD circuits without a state-appropriated juvenile public defender, you'll see that we have a number that show up from the circuits with the highest number of juvenile cases. We have Atlanta, Chattahoochee, Coweta, Eastern, and Stone Mountain. So we have all of those, and the other remaining circuits as well. Uh-oh. All right. So looking at the cost of those remaining 9 juvenile defenders, we would bring them in at the minimum APD salary, which is how we brought the other ones in, breaking that down, $50,000 as a minimum salary based on our state. Yes, I'll repeat that again. $50,000 as the minimum salary for a new assistant public defender coming in. It's probably not going to be enough for them to pay their law school loans, but that's the minimum salary. Added to that for salary and benefits, it comes out to about $80,882. And then, of course, because they're new, we have to roll in our initial training, travel. We have to give them computers. We have to do some of the basic stuff. And we can do that for about $2,500 for the first year for those individuals. So that comes to almost $750,000 to get them in place and ready to go. Now, if we look at our capacity to handle the cases that come in that we will be handling through appointments, we're looking at a different number, almost $500,000. And so again, this is a shift because they may have been conflicted in Superior Court, but they may not have been. And so what we did was we took our lowest historical conflict rate, which is 20%. The first number you see, the 6,661, is the number from the arrest data that the GBI arrest indicated. We multiply that and we come up with an estimate of about 1,332 potential new conflict cases that we would have to handle in juvenile court. So we take that number, we multiply it times what our reduced per case rate is, $360. I was waiting for the response on that. So $360, once you get that amount, it comes to $479,520. That's just expected attorney fees that we would pay at our reduced juvenile case rate. And then, of course, there are attendant fees that come along with the case. You would pay them if they were in Superior Court. You'd pay them if they were in juvenile court. So though that shift is probably going to be a wash. So we wouldn't have to capture those at all. So in sum, essentially, raise the age. The national discussion is that it represents a shift to a safer, more effective juvenile justice system and community. If this is the way that Georgia is going, we are ready to make this shift, of course, with appropriate funding. And as we've laid out, we would have to ensure that each of our circuit public defender offices are staffed with an assistant public defender who could dedicate their time to juvenile cases, because these are more juvenile cases. And also, we would have to think about the money we would need to recruit additional private attorneys to handle juvenile work. Not every, I'm going to call him an adult court attorney, someone who handles felonies, wants to deal and can deal in juvenile court because it's very different. So when we look at our numbers, that's what we're looking at as far as the impact of what it would mean for the agency. And I'd answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Representative Collins?
I've got a quick question for you. I know that you highlighted here about the circuits that don't have juvenile public defenders. I know that one of those circuits is the circuit that I represent a portion of, Coweta.
Yes.
Now, am I correct in understanding one of the reasons why is because there are some truly rural counties in that circuit? Is that what the reasoning is behind that, or it just hadn't been full?
Yeah, it just hasn't, the appropriations haven't been completed. It was going to be 43. So to back up, the counties partnered with us and said, we have accountability courts and we have juvenile courts. If you can get the state funding to carry out your mandate for the juvenile part of it, then they'll match that, even because accountability is not in our statute. So what we did was, because we received appropriations for the Juvenile Defense Council kind of in waves with each legislative session,
Right.
We just haven't finished receiving the appropriations to round those out. And the way we were able to do it is because of, kind of the support from the county,
Okay.
not long-term support, but able to move through and the need in the other counties.
That is a huge circuit.
Yes.
Coweta Judicial Circuit is a huge circuit.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Collins. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Director Roger, I had a quick question.
Yes.
On your, I guess it was, on your historical trend of juvenile cases handled versus the arrest rates. We look at the arrest rates, and the arrest rates have gone down significantly every year, about 15%, I think. How are there more and more cases?
We may have cases, and that's one of the things without getting into the GBI data, because I don't have the data behind it to look at the cases. That's the
Okay.
kind of analysis I would have to do
Okay.
to see if you're talking about individuals being charged at, 2 separate times. But I'm not sure how that would. I'm just using
Yeah.
the data that we have.
Okay. Do the public defenders, like if I have, how do y'all count cases as far as, is it charges? Is it individuals?
It's the case. So if I was charged with 4 offenses
Mhm.
and they all came on the same petition as a
Mhm.
juvenile, that's one case.
Mhm.
So I'm counting it as one case. I don't count it as separate cases.
So if there are 2 petitions, then that's counted as 2 cases.
They would be. They would start
Okay.
out as 2 cases, and then along the line, we may be able to do something with them, but they'd start out as 2 cases.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. Representative Sharper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In doing these numbers, and we know a lot is about the numbers, mainly about the citizens, the youth, we also need to get figures on what would be the savings on our adult system as far as courts, judges, facilities, and things like that. Because, we see these numbers that you guys are talking about are going to go up. But if those numbers are going up, that means the other numbers for the adult courts and judges and everybody should go down. So we need to see what we're looking like in that area. So I think that's something we need to, keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it would be across the board. I know in Louisiana, where they've staggered implementation, and North Carolina and South Carolina, they have said that it's an overall state balance,
Mhm.
as opposed to the shifting.
Okay.
What we're looking at is just a shift.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you, Director Rogers. We really appreciate your joining us today. Now we will hear from the Prosecuting Attorney's Council.
Madam Chair, with your permission, I know Mr. Norris has to pick up his dad and take him to the doctor. Could they go before me?
Sure. I was surprised Mr. Norris was joining us. He had told me that he wasn't, so it's fine. Okay, sure. We will now hear from the Sheriff's Association.
And Madam Chair, as well, the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police.
Okay.
remind us,
Sweet.
This is unprecedented, you all. The chiefs and the sheriffs are at the same table. And our new executive director of the Chiefs Association, Mr. Butch Ears. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I believe the chair has distributed to the members a short report that we were requested to try to pull together late last year, or actually during the session last year. You may have that in front of you. First, I'd like to say this. There are obviously a number.
Sorry, let me just interrupt for just a minute. Members of the committee, it was not put in your folders, but I will make sure that that's distributed to you later.
We recognize that this committee has spent an awful lot of work on this issue, rightfully so. We understand there's been a lot of very bright, smart people that have come with some very good information about the science behind the 17-year-old mind, et cetera. And I'm here today to tell you that we got some very smart, bright people in sheriff's offices and police departments in the state that deal with all juvenile offenders, all offenders in general, and has some very good experience in dealing with 17-year-olds. One of the things that I hear repeatedly from sheriffs is this, that these 17-year-olds in many cases failed to benefit from the juvenile system. Not from the failure of the system itself necessarily, but they chose not to learn from their mistakes. And it is true that the sheriffs are concerned with the additional costs. And I know the sub that I've seen would have fewer additional costs, granted. But in the original bill, it doesn't sound like a lot of money. Just in the transports that we could calculate, we could project, we could estimate, it was about $1.6 million to a lot of sheriff's offices throughout the state. That's not a lot of money in terms of what the state budget is, but it is an awful lot of money from sheriffs throughout the state. And I don't know what the chiefs would say about this, but what happens when a juvenile gets arrested is, you all know, they don't go to a county jail. They must go to a regional center created or operated by DJJ. That person must be transported sometime at great distances. Southwest Georgia, for instance, they're tremendous distances, and we reference some of that in the report that you all will see later. So that transport time and cost is a cost to that local county. It's not a cost to the state. It's a cost to local property taxpayers. In addition to the cost, there's the uncertainty of the cost of that deputy sheriff not being in his or her community. So that community, in a lot of places, you all know, we can't hire people. We can't pay people. So that limited number of deputy sheriffs in that county, now I've got a deputy sheriff that the sheriff's got to send, sometimes 100 miles away to a facility. Now, that is not the case in metro areas, for sure, but there is a cost there. I would say this too. In virtually every community in this state, your sheriff of your county and your police chiefs in your cities in these counties, these people are doing things every year, throughout the year, to help juveniles, help kids, help prevent crime, help prevent drug usage, help prevent gang activities. There is not a sheriff in this state that wants anybody in that county jail that doesn't need to be there. And if you all think otherwise, you're wrong. They want them out. They want the people that are not deemed to be dangerous out doing whatever. But they must keep others that are a threat to the communities in. So all of these people that we either elect at home or appoint at home as your police chiefs, we're all working for the same purpose. But we are the ones, sadly to say, we are the ones that see the 17-year-olds. We did look at DJJ's information, and the 17-year-olds, and they might correct me, I hope they won't, but what we saw on violent incidents in the DJJ system, the 17-year-olds were more violent than the other age groups. So I'm here to say today that the sheriffs are opposing raise the age. If it comes, it should come over time. If it comes, there's going to need to be tremendous adjustments, not just in the DJJ system or the juvenile justice system, but the way we handle these cases. We don't want, we want to help. The sheriffs want to help. And they don't want to seem as if they're the bad bullies on the street. But I can tell y'all, these people oftentimes are violent predators who have gone through the juvenile system and have failed to learn those lessons. So we would caution you or urge you to really consider those things. And finally, on the transport issue, it's not incumbent upon the state to make these transports. No matter what you do, there's going to be more transports. No matter what you do, I don't know the numbers. I've heard 200 million. I've heard other amounts that would be necessary. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be a lot. And it's not always going to be shifted from somewhere else. So I'll be happy to answer questions, but this is Dwayne Norick with the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police, and
Okay.
you certainly got insight as well.
Before you kick off, we have a couple of questions for Director Norris. Representative Hutchinson.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I just want to make sure I understood what you said. You began with saying that there are a lot of smart people with science, but that your testimony today was based on your experience. Was that?
On the experience of the office of sheriff and those who hold that office.
Okay. So my second question would be, what are the statistics on the 17-year-olds that you talked about that chose not to learn from their experiences?
I don't understand. What do you mean? What are the statistics?
You talked about 17-year-olds.
Oh, you mean how many?
Yeah.
Well, it is obviously the ones that are going to the adult system. Those that went through the juvenile system and now are in the adult system.
But those were 17-year-olds who made a mistake and then chose not to learn from their mistakes. That's a big difference from just someone who was arrested and went to an adult system.
Point. I don't have an answer for that.
Okay, so you don't have any
no, I
information
don't.
really on what 17-year-olds who chose not to learn from their mistakes and went on to an adult system?
I would presume that any 17-year-old who had gone through the juvenile system and then committed an offense, he didn't learn or she didn't learn from the juvenile system. That's what I'm saying.
I would completely disagree, but that's
Well,
just me. Thanks.
I'm basing that on experience.
Okay, thank you. Representative Cantrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Norris, for what you do. My sheriff and I, Frank Reynolds, my sheriff, and
Who's that?
Frank Reynolds, and we've been talking a lot about this issue. I have two questions for you. So, do you think it's in the best interest of the 17-year-old? I know the transportation things that is challenging, but do you think it's in the best interest of that 17-year-old to spend the night in county jail rather than to go to juvie?
I think that 17-year-old has a better chance of being released quicker in the county jail than in the juvenile system.
And is
Like
that what's best for them?
Sometimes it probably
Okay.
is, yes. Yes, I do think that sometimes.
And then the ones you described as violent, am I misunderstanding this bill? I thought the violent offenders were exempt.
They are exempt, but in the event of a violent offense, or excuse me, in the event of one of these other offenses, does not necessarily mean that that person is not capable or has not committed these other offenses.
Okay, fair enough. I get you.
I mean,
Okay.
so it's an age group. It's not a person.
I understand.
This was the other thought. I said at the outset, sheriffs and chiefs try to help kids. The Georgia Sheriff's Youth Homes has been in existence since 1960. We've helped thousands of kids. We send them to college. We've had hundreds and hundreds of 17-year-olds. We know a little bit about children from that perspective. But I ask this question: how safe? I mean, why is it good logic to take an older group of children, young adults, and place them with younger offenders? How is that? I mean, somebody has to explain that to me. I don't see the logic there.
You know, I just think it's the opposite. You're focusing on why is it good to put a really young person with a group of hardened adult criminals?
So
It's both sides. I hear you. I do. It's a conundrum. Where do you draw the line, I guess, is the point. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Cantrell, and I do apologize for neglecting that. 26, Representative Oliver.
One of the things that's confusing about this already complicated systemic issue is your transport question.
Yes, ma'am.
Not all sheriffs have law enforcement duties for the entire county, but they all have transport duties. Yes or no about that?
No and yes. No, every sheriff has precisely the same authority, whether it's DeKalb or Richmond County. The difference is some sheriff's offices in metropolitan areas also have a county police. For however that was created, those county police departments are funded by the county governing authority to do the law enforcement services. Doesn't mean the sheriffs don't have that authority, but yes, they all have the same authority and they all do transports. Yes, ma'am.
So in DeKalb County, is the sheriff's office the only office, I'm using DeKalb as an example, the only office that does transports?
I'm unsure of that. This is on the initial arrest, whatever the arresting agency is, where it could be the DeKalb PD, one of the municipalities, or the sheriff's office. Whoever makes that arrest is typically in DeKalb going to take that child through the courts to the RYDC. Once that child makes it to the RYDC, however, the sheriff is the officer of the court, the juvenile court as well, in DeKalb County. So any transport related to hearings or other matters, it becomes the sheriff's responsibility. In most counties where there's not a county police department, or even the cities, the sheriffs are making cases as well. So they're making that initial transport, but if the police department makes the case and gets that juvenile offender to the regional jail for the court hearings, the sheriff is responsible for that.
What you're proving is that, to me, is again, the transport issue is pretty different and distinct in 159 counties.
Not so much, no.
I
you do have a
cannot
large
remember
county,
all the times we've had discussion about alternate ways to transport mentally ill or children. And in every instance in the last 20 years when we've had that conversation, how to take the responsibilities off or away from the sheriff's office, how many times have we made any progress on that issue with y'all?
Almost everything falls on the back of the office of sheriff when it comes to transport, mental patients, of course, the other responsibilities of this. So as an officer of the court, all that is inherent upon the office of sheriff. So
We
there's no
have
change.
had, just for the committee's benefit, there's been a whole lot of discussion historically over that duty, which you have, and how do we relieve that duty and how we move it to somebody else who might be able to do it. In some places in Georgia that happens, and not all places, and that's part of the complication of this, because your sheriff should not be taken off real police work if they have the duty of doing real police work to take a nonviolent 14-year-old somewhere. But we have other ways to solve that, and we haven't been able to do that. I just want the committee to know that's one of my frustrations about this issue. Transport issues is always a defense to this bill and many other issues, but we never find a solution.
Well, if I may, if the state had the resources, the State Department of Juvenile Justice would make those transports.
That's an option for us to
Yes,
consider,
ma'am.
saving your money.
Let us stay home.
It's one of the things that it's always a defense, and it's never a solution. I'm just asking for more help on the solution end of it.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative Oliver. Representative Kendrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So going back to what Chairman Cantrell hinted on, so I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. We had previous testimony of people who are set up to help these juveniles and help them with whatever they need and in the system. And then now you're telling us as people who are sort of sworn to not only protect the public, but also to control these individuals, and you have the job of, arresting them and making sure that they're not in society, that 17-year-olds are somehow very, very different than, 16-year-olds. So could you tell me, what do you think the difference is between a 16 and a 17-year-old, since you noted your experience, or people you work around, their experience between 16 and 17-year-olds? And I know we're going to have to pick an arbitrary age, but I'm having a hard time understanding what you think the difference is between a 16 and a 17-year-old based on your experience.
I do not know the science behind that, and I cannot sit here and say that a number of 16-year-olds aren't being arrested too. In fact, I can give you an example today, which I won't bore you with, that happened this week. A bad case with a 16-year-old. But I think we drew the line because the juvenile court jurisdiction is 16-year-olds. So the next group that we would look at would be 17-year-olds, correct? That'd be if we were going to expand or raise the age. So that's, all I can say is, we arrest a lot of 17-year-olds. And if you look at you don't have the report, but if you look at the GCIC numbers for 2019, there were 5,355 arrests of 17-year-olds in the state. 1,518 of those were for felony offenses. 3,837 were for misdemeanor offenses. So we looked at it as 5,300 17-year-olds is the way we started our conversation with ourselves about this.
Just to note, that information was provided by the public defenders on their PowerPoint, the number of arrests. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that committee members knew they had that information. Was there anything else, Director Norris? I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to point out that we did have that information. So, anything else? Representative Kendrick, anything further? Okay. Representative Hutchinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to go back to your question about logic. Your question was you didn't understand the logic between the logic of putting an older child in with a younger child. Is that correct? Okay, I think the operative word is child. We're here talking about children in their lives, and how we place them with younger children shouldn't have any part of the conversation. They're children, and I think that's the whole point of this of the bill. And I think I speak for the other members of the committee, is I think we appreciate statistics and data. One example of one child that happens to be bad or in a gang doesn't go with all the statistics that we've had. So the examples to me are not valid.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Representative. Representative Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How old do you have to be to be a deputy in Georgia?
21.
21. Jailer as well?
Well, you can't go to work until you're 21. I'm sorry? Same.
Jailer as well. But you can get post-certification and be an
18.
officer at 18, right?
18, yeah.
And you can carry a weapon at 18 while you're on duty, is that correct?
You know that?
Mm-hmm. Isn't that right? Okay. I just want to verify that.
Okay. Thank you, Representative. Representative Sharper.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a general question here, listening to everybody. During the year, we had, special meetings here. One thing that was my concern, and something the commissioner may look into, when we look at the 13-year-olds, the 15-year-olds, 16 to 17-year-olds, my concern was that age group, those younger teens and the older teens, being kind of in the same, facilities, but I think somebody was going to reassure me or make sure that the different programs and treatments that they have, that these kids are not kind of like more in a general population, because a lot of the younger kids, some younger kids, are learning certain things from the older kids, and instead of them going in and getting the treatment they need, they're learning how to be more of criminals and causing a problem. So that was one little observation that I've seen working in my community, to see what's really going on with these kids, and that may help out some of the facilities where you are kind of low in people, that say, okay, maybe we need to work with this particular group of young kids, specializing with their particular treatments that they need, versus just everybody's in there. So I think we can be more strategic if we can, if we're not already looking at that. But the younger with the older situation, I think that needs to be addressed and get some numbers on where people are.
And if I may, that was kind of my point about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, in jails, we have to classify people.
Okay.
And in prison, they classify people based on a lot of factors. And that classification would be important. And my point was putting 17-year-olds with 14-year-olds might not be a good idea if there was not a way to classify and segregate to that extent. But to that point, you're seeing more and more school systems in our state have a 9th grade academy. Mm-hmm. And the reason is to keep the 9th graders from the upperclassmen, mm-hmm. to give them a chance to get started before they get those other older influences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Sharper. Anything further from the committee? Okay. Did you have something?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sure.
My name's Dwayne Norick. I'm Assistant Executive Director of Georgia Police Chiefs. And I know I don't look like it, but I've been in this business for 40 years. And when I started out, I'm just going to back up a second. The Georgia Police Chiefs concur with the sheriffs. We're opposed to raising the age at this time. When I started out 40 years ago, I remember I grew up in Thomastown, it was a community of about 13, 15,000, 25,000 in the whole county. We'd go a year and wouldn't do a juvenile complaint. Today in those communities, they're doing 4 or 5 a day. Now, my argument is there's something happened in our society, and it's not about decision making, it's about their decision making skill sets, about what they think is appropriate and inappropriate behavior is different now than what it was when we were coming along in the 70s and the 80s. And I worked at DJJ for 2 years and had a ranking position, and since I've left, they are overwhelmed. There are some very hard-working, dedicated people there. It is a unsung profession. When I interviewed, I told them they are the redheaded children of the correctional system. But to answer the question a minute ago, would they be safer in the county jail than a juvenile facility? According to the facility, they would be safer in the county jail as a 17-year-old. It depends on the individual. You have people come in there that are sheep, and you have kids that are coming there predators. I can tell you from personal experience that 2 kids who have recently been in the, and I'll say kids, they were 17, 18 years old now. One was involved in a shooting at the, where he shot and killed somebody, and then he shot the guard at the studios in South Atlanta, was in DJJ facilities a year ago. Right? Another young man who was involved in a pursuit that resulted in somebody's death the other day had been in a DJJ facility for murder, and he had just beat that case. So this is the issue out there, and I think we overlook that officers are doing a lot of things with kids that are 17, 18 years old. There's a lot of judgments. They're not out looking for young people to put in jail. They're looking to do the job of protecting their communities. And I concur with what Terry's saying, and I know it's scary for some of you who've been around a long time, that the chiefs and the sheriffs are wholeheartedly in agreement with this. We're not there trying to lock up children and put them in YDC. There are young children out there who are predators, that are dangerous young men and sometimes young girls in the facilities. And I personally, as a police chief, one of the last people we put in before I left and came to the metro Atlanta area was a person who had repeatedly been in the juvenile system. And he was so bad that we put a video on his house. If you talk to him, you would think he was a college graduate. He was the most conscientious, obedient person. But we have him on video there was a lady across the street from his house that left her house 3 times a week, Wednesday mornings to go to the supermarket to get discounts, Sunday morning service and Sunday afternoon service, and Sunday night worship service. He knew she had gone that morning. He went in, broke in her house, and she came home early from the store, and he shot and killed her. And the last things she told the officers and the paramedics before she died, a description of who the person was, we went and pulled the video, and there he is walking in his house with all the stuff he had just taken. And again, if you would talk to him, you would think, first time I ever met him, I'm like, this kid must be straight A student, a very intelligent, articulate young man. And when he got before the judge said, I used to be a juvenile court judge, and I gave you chance after chance after chance after chance. Now you've run out of chances. And what I fear, having worked in a predominantly minority community, is the people that are most fearful are the older people living in those communities. I worked there for 21 years. They're the people that are most likely to be victimized and at most dangerous, at most danger. And I've gone to people's homes who were 60, 70 years old, and they put a brace across their door because they're afraid somebody's going to break in on them and hurt them in the middle of the night. And having worked in DJJ, I can tell you that is a good organization of what they're trying to do, but they're overwhelmed. Okay, I've been gone for 2 years now, and the new commissioner's doing a fantastic job. I hear great things about him and all the command staff there, but we think, as an association, moving the age from 17 to 18 would not be beneficial for our communities.
Okay, thank you. Members of the committee, any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
Committee, we're going to be at ease for just about 5 minutes, just to kind of get up and stretch our legs, and then we'll hear from the Prosecuting Attorney's Council. That will be our final person that we hear from today. Thank you. We'll be at ease for 5 minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if we'll kind of rein it back in and our committee members will join us back, we'd appreciate it. Okay, thank you very much, committee members. Appreciate everybody hanging with us. And now it's time for our last group that we're going to hear from, the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. And they just left. Mr. Smith, you're not ready? Is it Director Scandalakis? Okay. TMI. You could have just said he'd stepped out. We'll be at ease for just one more minute. Thank you. Chairman Cantrell has suggested that we all break into applause when Director Scandalakis is able to join us. So here he comes.
Here we go.
Thank you, Director Scandalakis. You're all that's standing between us and freedom. No pressure. We would appreciate brevity. But I'll allow you to introduce yourself to the committee, and over to you.
My name's Pete Scandalakis. I'm the Executive Director for the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. And just so you know, prior to that, for 25 years, I was the elected district attorney in Representative Collins' circuit, the Coweta Judicial Circuit, which is a 5-county circuit. Sitting next to me is Will Johnson. Will is our elder abuse resource prosecutor. So you may ask, why do I have an elder abuse resource prosecutor sitting next to me? Because he doubles as our juvenile resource prosecutor, okay? So it's kind of a bad joke, but it's from cradle to grave, okay? Right. So I appreciate what the committee's doing. I think it's an honorable job that you're doing. I think it's a huge task that you've undertaken. And as you delve into the juvenile court system and raise the age, and you delve into the superior court system, it reminds me of the parable of the 3 blind men who hear about a great sculpture in the square. So each one goes. One feels the tail and says it's a rope. One feels the mid-size of the elephant and says it's a wall, and the other one feels the tusk and says it's a spear. And so that's kind of the burden that y'all have now is the juvenile court system is so diverse in this state that it's very difficult to take on the cost of what it would cost to transition when you raise the age. Just so you know, the DAs have not taken a position on this because we're still waiting to see exactly what the committee is going to recommend and how you're going to go about implementing it. And I think this is all about resources. And what resources are you going to make available to us? One of the things is we've sent our fiscal note in, and I will tell you that fiscal note, has some play in it because we don't know exactly what offenses y'all are talking about transferring to juvenile court. We don't know the timetable, and just like the juvenile judge who testified here earlier, you take the Coweta Judicial Circuit. It's a 5-county circuit. I was one of the fortunate ones that got one of the state-paid juvenile prosecutors. I put that state-paid juvenile prosecutor into the 2 poorest counties to handle that caseload because I didn't even have enough resources from the counties to handle my superior court caseload and my state court caseload because I also did misdemeanors. In the 3 other counties that have full-time juvenile court judges, I opted out. In other words, I told the county commissioners that I do not have enough resources to cover superior court and juvenile court. So I opted out of that court. And so the counties hired 3 contract juvenile prosecutors to handle that court. Now those contract prosecutors also use their own secretaries for the paperwork. And as y'all well know, there's certain timetables you have to meet. So if you say to us that, okay, from now on, you're going to handle juvenile court cases, my fiscal note includes an additional prosecutor per circuit, not per county. Mind you, some counties have 8 counties, some have 5, some have 3, some have 1 county, and also an admin person to help process that paperwork. And it also includes the 9 juvenile prosecutors that have yet to be funded yet. I'll also point out that, as the public defender's executive director told you, they will need additional public defenders because you can't have one person in 3 courts at one time. So that's kind of the burden that we're looking at, is what resources are you going to take? And you had a good question. Your question was, or your statement was, well, if we shift the cases to juvenile court, that'll free up the resources in superior court. And that's not necessarily the case, because a lot of circuits, particularly in the DA's office, are underfunded. In my example, in most of my multi-counties, probably in multi-counties, probably in every county, the state pays about 30% of the total cost of a DA's office. 70% comes from the counties. So I think what I would leave y'all with is, and I've talked to Representative Oliver about this numerous times, we don't know the numbers. We cannot get a good handle on what numbers we're talking about. When you talk about traffic citations and having juvenile court judges and juvenile court prosecutors handle traffic citations, remember there are a number of cases in which we don't know anything about how many citations are handling. And all the municipal courts of this state, which are not courts of record, we have no idea how many traffic cases are being run through those courts. So if you're going to say that all traffic citations of a 17-year-old from this point forward go to juvenile court, you have to really be careful what you're doing to Atlanta, Chatham Circuit, DeKalb County, and any circuit that has just multiple municipal courts, because you're going to increase the caseload tremendously. We've done a kind of an anecdotal look about what it would do to increase our caseload. For example, the Macon Circuit has an open juvenile caseload of about 230 cases. She has estimated that if you raise the age to 18, her caseload would double. Now, understand this, doubling the caseload can be handled if you have enough resources. Double the caseload can be handled, but you also have in juvenile court, what you don't have in superior court, is certain time frames. You've got to meet those time frames. If you don't meet those time frames, it's what? Dismissed. Well, not only is the case dismissed, but you're also doing harm to the juvenile you're trying to get treatment for. So I guess what I'm saying, and one other thing I would caution y'all about, and I understand, and I listened to the expert here about North Carolina and the other states that did it. North Carolina is a different animal than Georgia. North Carolina has a more unified court system than we do. It's a completely different animal than we are. And so when you look at Georgia, take into account we have 159 counties. Some are very, very poor. Some can afford the expenses. And we have 159 sheriffs and have 49 judicial circuits. We don't have a state court in every county, so the DA has to cover that as well, as does the public defender. So even though they have the responsibility to do superior court, they may be in fact covering state court in those circuits that don't have state court. So I guess that's what I leave you with is I ask you to proceed cautiously. I ask you to also take into account that if you're going to raise the age, that you look at giving the DAs more discretion on other cases other than SB 440 cases. And if you're not familiar with SB 440 are what we now call the 7 deadlies: homicide, rape, kidnapping with bodily injury, aggravated child molestation, aggravated sodomy, and I can't remember the 7th one. But anyway, those are the ones in which the DAs have exclusive jurisdiction, and so the case can come to us, and then we make a decision. Does it stay in superior court, or should it be transferred back to juvenile court? And I had a staff, and we would consistently review those cases. We did not have a blanket policy that if a 13-year-old committed an armed robbery with a firearm, that 13-year-old would be better treated in superior court than he or she would be in juvenile court. So, and most DAs do that. They have a case-by-case analysis. But what I would ask is if you're going to raise the age, you consider including other violent offenses in those cases in which the DA has to be the gatekeeper and look at those cases to decide. Because quite frankly, a 17-year-old charged with shoplifting is a lot different than a 17-year-old charged with child molestation. And those two cases ought not be treated the same. And that's what I would caution you to when you look at your bills.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Director Skandalakis. 27, Representative Chairman Blackman.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Skandalakis, this is not meant to be a fiscal question, and I may not be asking it quite the right way, but you and I talked briefly about it. How much harder is it to prosecute a 16-year-old for one of these, terrible crimes than a 17-year-old at present?
It's really about the same. It all depends on, for example, if you have a 16-year-old with an armed robbery, and that 16-year-old is as tall as you are, because I'm kind of a short guy, as tall as you are, and looks like a big kid, and comes in with a firearm and robs a convenience store. That case is not as difficult to prosecute as you would a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old. Now, if you have a 16-year-old who comes in and he's a small child, I mean, he looks like a small child and he's very diminutive, and he's part of an association, that case would take a different type of, you might take a different approach to it and look at that kid and say, this might be better in juvenile court. I want to also point one other thing. Not only do you have 159 counties and 49 different judicial circuits, but depending on where you commit the crime, there are different resources available to you for treatment. And that's one of the sad things about our state is, you may not have the resources to be able to treat a child the same in different parts of this state. And so I'm all for treatment, and I'm all for cutting the DA's felony caseload. I don't mind telling you, none of us would be opposed to that. But what is it that we're going to do once we decide to make these decisions?
Okay. All right, Representative Oliver.
Thank you for your, what I think is the honest answer. You're really not sure how many numbers you'll be dealing with. I think that is the honest answer, and we need to do some work. Tell me who in Georgia, or what entity, would be the best entity to give me the information about what to do about traffic offenses? Who can figure that out?
That's a great question, and I'll have to do some research and get back to you, because I'm really not sure. Do you know?
Jay Neal is the guy with money. I just wonder if anybody's asking Jay Neal with his money pots to help us figure that out.
I am happy to look into that and find out. Part of that answer is going to be based on, in some circuits you have
it's very complicated.
Yeah. For instance, in some circuits you do have county police, city police, and sheriff's office, and they may share the burden. However, in some places like Bibb County, you have a combined city-county government, and you have one entity. The sheriff's office is the only law enforcement entity, so all transport falls on them.
No, she's talking about citation. We talking about citation.
I'm talking about traffic.
Oh, citation. Sorry, I
Traffic
thought we were back to transport.
No. Well, that's a good question. Who's going to figure this out in a meaningful way? That's what I want to know. And it's not going to be me.
Okay.
Representative Oliver, we'll try to find that out for you, because I don't know. And
well, that is, and if you want to know the answer to that, I know we had one meeting where, GMA and ACCG were very comfortable about how much money that is generated, and it's sad to me that if we allow the revenue that's made off the backs of 17-year-olds to decide policy in the state, that's sad. So hopefully we won't get to that level. Representative Sharper.
Thank you again. I'm trying to be brief here. Back when you raised the question when I talked about the money, the shift, and all that, I want to get with you a little bit later on, and we're going to kind of figure out, you was mentioning about the time, things need to be done in juvenile, the time, and then we're going to see that correlation of the money and then the time of what the courts have to do and how quick they have to do it. Second thing is, we're looking at raising the age, and I'm just put it out here for reality, okay? The fact when I came up, you know, as a teenager, a lot of times you would hear people say, or even in little gangs and groups, certain crimes let the younger person do it because he'll be out. If he's 13, 14, 15, 16, he do the crime, you'll get 2 months, and then you'll be back out. But if we're the older people in the gangs doing it, then we're gonna be in longer. So are we saying that there's a possibility that if we do raise the age, that now you're gonna get the small 17-year-old that doesn't look very intimidating be recruited in a gang to do certain things that maybe he can get out a little bit earlier? Or where are we headed with that? That's just a general question.
And that's a great question. It's one that I can answer specifically. Is we see that all the time. And we have a problem with younger kids committing crimes for older kids because they know the punishment is different in juvenile court and less severe. And one of the things I once met with one of my juvenile court judges, Judge Michael Key, because he was concerned about these younger kids who were committing shopliftings and dealing with narcotics. And he was asking us, he said, you know, can you go after the guy that's putting him up to it? And I said, certainly we can and we will if they'll agree to testify. But of course, the carrot there is they're not going to testify because they understand what the realm of punishment is, and there's no point to turn on their friends. So that's always a problem, and it will continue to be a problem. And I don't know if you can craft a solution to solve that.
Well, one thing I've seen throughout the state is a lot of crimes where people stealing a lot of guns, where a lot of these gangs, they get the young people to break in vehicles, break in homes, home evasions, and you know, robbing drug dealers for money and for drugs. And they're sending in the 15, 16-year-old, and you know, knowing that they're in, and then next thing you know, after their screening, it's 15 days later, how are you already out? So this is a reality.
The experiences you have are happening, and they will continue to happen. And I don't know if you can ever craft a statute to prevent that from happening.
Okay. In your opinion, do you think that if we do raise the age, instead of them getting to 14, 15, 16, now it's going to be 15, 16, 17? What do you think?
You know, I think, again, it's so difficult to talk in generalities because what we do know is a minority of the population, in other words, 10% of the population commits about 80% of the crimes.
Okay.
And I've never seen that number shift. Unfortunately, I've prosecuted in my 25 years great-grandfathers, grandfathers, fathers, and now their offspring for committing crimes. And they just say, hey, it's a family business. So, you know, you'll see some kids that you'll be able to reach, and you'll see some kids that you won't be able to reach. And that's just reality. We're never going to get to 0% crime in a crime rate in this country. We're just not going to do it. It's not realistic. And so before this committee is, as a policy, how do y'all want to treat 17-year-olds? And the DAs will follow the policy that you set. We just ask that you take into account certain crimes that we would like to have the ability to say, this kid needs more than juvenile treatment. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I can tell you that the cases we reviewed, we were very cognizant of the fact that the better place to have certain offenders was juvenile court. They had a treatment plan for sex offenders at times. They had treatment plans for trying to keep the families together. So we wanted to steer some offenders to juvenile court. But there were other cases in which the young man had been through juvenile court for a number of times and had to be separated from our community because it made our community safer. It made his neighborhood or her neighborhood safer. So I guess that's the best I can answer, and I don't mean to be dodging the question, but that's about the best I can do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sharper. Any other questions for the committee? All right, thank you, committee members. We are adjourned.
Thank you very much.